Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. I know we have quite a few other folks who are expecting to join us, but luckily, the first part of our conversation today is more of a facilitated discussion with the Q&A at the end. So I think it'll work out to go ahead and jump in. So welcome for those of you who are here. I'm Katie DeBeer, Director of Alumni Engagement at Western New England University. My colleague Christina Alexak has joined us today, and together we'll be kind of co-hosting and facilitating this presentation. I'm really excited about this very timely topic, purpose-driven career growth. I think in the last couple of years, especially through the pandemic, I know I've heard from so many people, both through the Western New England Alumni Network and also in my personal life, who just really started to question, the choices that they made about their career, what they were doing, the role that work played in their life. And I think that we're going to answer a lot of the big questions around this today. So no pressure for our panelists who are here. But before we dive in, I do want to share just a few housekeeping items. If your display name on Zoom isn't your actual name, feel free to update that. You can right-click on your picture and just select rename to change your name. In order to help with the audio quality for the recording, we're just going to ask that everyone stays muted throughout unless you're actively speaking. We are recording and we'll share the link to this in a follow-up email. It'll be posted to our YouTube channel. You are welcome to have your video on or off during the event based on your own comfort. Our program today, we'll hear some brief introductions from each of our panelists. The first half of our hour will be a moderated discussion on the topic of purpose-driven career growth, and then we'll switch into a Q&A session at the end. Our goal is that this is an interactive event, and especially with our smaller group today, we really do want to invite everyone who's on with us this afternoon to jump in, ask questions, get the answers that you came for from our panelists. There are two different ways that you can do that. You can either choose the reactions and raise your hand, and we'll call on you and you can ask your question out loud, or if you prefer, you can send your question in a chat to the hosts, and Christina will share those with everyone. So let us go ahead and dive in. I'm very excited to introduce our panelists today, and thank you to each of you for being here. In the first part, I'll just briefly introduce you, but if you could share a little bit about yourself, whatever you'd like to share with our guests today about your work, what you're up to, what parts of it bring you the most joy before we dive in, that would be great. So first, we have John Pantera, who majored in accounting and finance at Western New England University, graduating with his BSBA in 2001. He has 20 years of leadership and entrepreneurial experience, having switched careers several times to keep evolving in an ever-changing workforce. He currently serves as Director of Franchise Sales and Development for WellBiz Brands, a health and beauty franchisor based out of Denver, Colorado, with over 1,000 franchise locations. Welcome, John. Oh, you're muted. It's all right. We'll get the hang of this.
Yeah, one of these days. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And just to dive in real quick to what I'm doing now, what brings me joy is I get to help budding entrepreneurs become business owners. And it's a kind of a newer thing for me, where I was more on the support end for coaching entrepreneurs. And now I help to help people make that a reality and open doors for a new business. So very excited to be here, and very excited to be a part of this wonderful group.
Thank you. Next, I am excited to introduce Morgan Torian, who earned her Bachelor of Arts in English Language and Literature from Western New England in 2014. Morgan has recently made a career leap into corporate HR and talent acquisition after working in higher education. She has a passion for DEI and brings that lens to her current work to support the creation and audit of equitable hiring practices. Welcome, Morgan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm really excited to share space with each of you today. What brings me joy in my current work? I really love finding people new jobs. I think that's really exciting, especially working for the company that I work for, Team Snap. It's a really great company. So I just get really excited to find great talent and place them correctly within the company. So thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we have Rob Madrid, who earned his MBA from Western New England in 2009 and is president and founder of DigiArcs, a digital marketing agency based in Connecticut that serves clients across the United States. Before founding DigiArcs in 2021, Rob was head of client strategy and sales operations for Mass Live Media in Springfield.
Thanks, Katie. And so one of the things I really like, John, I like the way you set this off with what brings us joy. And one of the things that really inspires me is the ability to help clients on my own terms. I spent about 15 or so years in the corporate environment and got a lot of really good experience, saw a lot of things I liked and saw a lot of things I think I would never do again too. So it was all really good at helping me to get to a place where I felt confident to start my own business and start that entrepreneurial journey. And I just had a lot of fun interacting with other students at Western New England too on some of the counseling and some of the career counseling I've done. So I'm excited to sort of share some of that today.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, I'm excited to introduce Suzanne Parker, who earned her Juris Doctor from the School of Law at Western New England in 2003. Suzanne has been the executive director of Girls Inc. of the Valley since 2006, where she works closely with the community, staff, and board of directors to inspire all girls to be strong, smart, and bold. Welcome, Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the invitation. I guess on that, based on that introduction, I haven't made many changes in the past 16 years, but I have to say what brings me joy is leading an organization that is forever strategic and thinking ahead about what we need to do to grow, and certainly reaching the people, the youth, and the community that we work with brings me the greatest joy. But right now we have a massive building project. We bought a building and we're renovating it. Who knew that I'd be overseeing such a big project as a nonprofit exec, but it's really exciting and it's bringing me a lot of joy. Well, I think it'll bring me more joy when I move into the new building once fully renovated, but there you have it. So thanks for the invitation to be here.
Great, thank you. And I see quite a few other folks joining us as we went through our introduction. So just as a reminder, we do have the second portion of our hour reserved as a Q&A. But if you do have a pressing question as we're going through this discussion, feel free to drop it in the chat or use the reactions to raise your hand and we'll call on you. We really do want this to be an interactive program, so feel free to dive right in. For our first part, for our panelists, I'm just going to throw some questions out. Anyone can jump in and answer however you like, and we'll hopefully hear a little bit more about your experiences and get some advice for our participants along the way. So to start, I'd love to hear how have you personally aligned your passions and values with your career? Don't be shy.
Humongous question. I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to try to keep this brief because I could talk about this for days. But early on, graduating undergrad from Western New England, did what most of us do, and that's go find a good, stable job, right? And I was guided towards that, and I had some great advisors that helped me to figure that out. But I very quickly understood that that environment wasn't for me, right? The nature of the work wasn't for me. I worked with amazing people, but I wasn't necessarily motivated or inspired. And I thought it was just me. I thought there was something wrong, right? I thought, oh God, what did I waste these, 4 years and however many hundreds of $1,000s on an education that I'm not going to use now. But for me personally, and this was one of my earliest mentors told me that there's really three things you have to consider when you're looking at a career. Number one is, are you passionate about the nature of the work? And that was number one for a reason, because he told me if that's not there, then the money will never be enough, right? The benefits, the paid vacation time, it'll never be enough. It's going to catch up to you, and you're going to wake up 20, 30, 40 years from now and say, I can't believe I spent the majority of my waking hours doing something that I didn't really love. And the second thing that he taught me was, make sure that it grants you abilities to do what you want to do with your life. So that work-life balance, I use the phrase time freedom a lot, right? Make sure it's not something that you are married to so that you miss all of the other things in life. And then lastly was, make sure that it drives your economic engine, right? Make sure the money is right, because nobody wants to be a starving artist, right? So I've always just tried to flow all of my career decisions through those 3 filters. And thus far it's worked out because it's allowed me to say no to a lot of things that didn't have one of those 3 factors in place.
I think for me, I did a lot of jobs I didn't like, and I bounced around a lot. And looking back at it, I've gotten to a place now, scratching 40, where I have aligned with my values because my company is allowed to be, right? Because I've kind of set those rules. But I realize now, and looking back at it, it took a lot of the pain of some of the jobs that I had that maybe I didn't always like, that kind of taught me how to get to the spot that I'm in now too. And I guess one of the things I would say, and I say to a lot of the younger folks that I speak to, is that don't put too much pressure on it, because you can always change. You can always find something new and different to do. And I think the days are gone that someone's going to be like, you had 3 jobs in 4 years, and that's going to be a major talk. And if it is, that's probably not the right company for you, in my opinion, right? To editorialize a little bit much, but I think, to John's point, like, find experiences where you think you can get something out of it besides money, is really, really important, right? Whether that's mentorship or experience within a brand that you think you respect a lot, and then obviously you're gonna not be happy if you can't pay your bills. So you have to figure out, make sure the economics work, and whether that's making certain decisions in your personal life to make it work, maybe to be in that nonprofit, maybe that's important, right? So that's been my experience, right? Just find something that you think you can have some passion about, that's going to push you forward in some way, and then don't put pressure on it, because if it's not right, you can find something different.
I'd agree with all of that. And being that I'm the executive for a nonprofit, I mean, certainly there's a lot of passion for the mission of being strong, smart, and bold, and inspiring women, which just really resonates with me a lot. Spent a lot of time thinking about those things. But I'd have to say that I think I heard a recent statistic that most people coming out of college right now will have 17 different jobs in 3 different careers. And so I guess maybe I'm a little bit of a dinosaur in the fact that I've been working in the nonprofit world for, basically my whole professional career. I think if you do find that right passion and that right fit, make sure there's growth opportunities. I guess I would add, the passion, the ability, and the time. I love that, John, how you framed that in the economic engine, but also the opportunity to grow. I mean, it could be that you land yourself in a career or in a job or in a company where there's opportunities for you to change and grow. I mean, even though I've been the executive director here for an organization, I've been able to lead through growth and through change, which has kept me inspired. And I think, every year I ask myself, and I think the executive committee asks, are you still in that place where you feel inspired, where you can continue to contribute? And I think that's really important for whatever career you do. So you can be somewhere for a long time, but just make sure you're growing and changing with it.
Yeah, I love what everyone has said so far. I don't have a whole lot more to add. But for me, so I spent about 8 years, the first 8 years of my career in higher education. And I felt really passionate about kind of blending my values in terms of building community and also creating equity for folks who are underrepresented, much like myself. And I loved what I did. But I think what's so important is exactly what each of the panelists has said, is like, one, work-life integration, work-life balance is so important, because otherwise you're going to burn out, and you're going to burn out really quickly. 2, money matters. Unfortunately, it does. And so you've got bills to pay. So make sure those are at the forefront. And then also, finding the opportunity for growth. And so those, for me, I'm coming up on my 1 year within corporate America and the tech industry, which is exciting. To be honest with you, I didn't think I would be here, but those were really the driving forces that really pushed me and propelled me outside of higher education. And I still remain connected in other ways. So I currently serve on the board of directors for a national nonprofit conference that is focused on higher education, students within higher ed, and folks who serve in AmeriCorps and at different nonprofits. And so there are other ways to kind of fuel those passions for me, but at the end of the day, that really drove my career transition. So.
Great, thank you. Well, and I wonder, as a little segue, because one of the topics I was hoping to talk about, and maybe Morgan, if you want to jump in first, I think for a lot of our alumni, they might have an idea of where they want to get to, but how can they package their current skills and transfer them into a new industry or a different type of work. And I will say, also having worked in technology and higher ed, there couldn't be two different animals on the face of the earth. So for you, having gone the other direction in that flow, what steps did you take to position yourself to make that move? And what would you recommend to our alumni who are thinking about doing something similar?
So for me, partially I got lucky. My position was reorged into human resources. So I had the opportunity again for the learning and the growth and the mentorship there to kind of easily make that transition. But I would say, one, find a mentor if you can, find somebody who will coach you or at least look at your materials. Two, look at job descriptions within the industry that you're looking to move to. What are the key words that they use there? And if you read a job description and you're like, I've done all these things, find a way to use that exact language within your resume and within your cover letter. I will say, as a recruiter, I don't really read cover letters, so don't waste your time if you don't have to. At least within tech, I think in nonprofit and other industries, it's different. But I would say those are the two biggest things. For me, it took a lot of self-reflection and looking at my own resume. I think within higher ed, we love to add a lot of fluff and be creative. And also my background is in English. So I love to write. And so I had to really cut a lot and just cut straight to the point, as well as looking at every single role that I've had and identifying what the things within each role were that I really, really love to do. So in every single one of my roles, I was hiring hundreds of students every single fall at least. And so I love to hire, I love to interview, I love meeting new people, hearing their story, getting people to tell me their story. That's really exciting. And so I remember when I finally landed on recruiting and talent acquisition, I told a friend and he was like, why would you want to do that? But for me, that's really exciting. So identify the things that you have done in your career or that you've done in past jobs that you really, really like, and then let that, fuel your search. That's my advice.
Great, thank you. And any of our other panelists want to weigh in? I know some of you have made the transition or maybe hiring folks from unexpected industries into roles in your organizations.
I'll jump in here. And Morgan, those are great points. I love that takeaway of going to read job descriptions of what you may want to do and then trying to replicate that language. I'm going to steal that one. But one thing when I think about my crazy left-right turn career that's never been straightforward, but it's always been moving forward. During some of my left turns that were just kind of out of left field, I sought out people who were doing it well, and I basically just begged them for their time, right? And I charm the hell out of them. I flatter them. I tell them, you're so successful and I want to be like you. Will you please let me buy you a coffee? Will you please let me take you out to lunch and pick your brain, because I'm starting out. I don't know what I'm doing. So a lot of it was just being super humble, super honest. And also, again, flattery gets you a long way. So if someone ever came to me and said, hey, you're really good at what you do, can I pick your brain? What kind of jerk would I be to say no, right? Of course I'm going to say yes, because they're making me feel pretty good about myself. So I think a lot of it too is just kind of swallowing that pill of pride and saying, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing, but I need to go figure out what the best way is to spend my time to figure out if this is a good opportunity for me. And again, the best way to do it is seek out those that have made all the mistakes before you that can save you a lot of time and all that ramp up. And again, the power of a cup of coffee, right? Or, cup of tea, maybe it's a beer, right? Whatever, whoever you're talking to, try to create a situation where they'd be willing to say yes and give you an hour of their time. And honestly, that alone has saved me probably decades of making career mistakes that I would have made if I tried to figure it out on my own.
Thank you.
the only thing I'll say is that I think there's absolutely nothing that bad that happens from building a relationship, right? As kind of John's saying, and you never know how that's, I have had benefits in my business now from relationships I had over a decade ago that frankly, people that I just didn't consider on a daily basis, you know, and leaving a good impression on everybody. I think that's also too, like, you know, you may have some, you may have jobs you don't like the people and you don't like what they did to you while you were there, but leaving in a way where you kind of mail it in for the last 3 months and then get another job and they're happy to see you go, there's usually not a positive outcome there, you know, for anybody. So I mean, that's a kind of an offshoot, I guess, of building relationships. You're always building relationships at every level, wherever you're going. So that's, I think, a really good point, John.
Great. So one of the topics that I think each of you mentioned when introducing yourselves was sort of the economics of aligning your profession with your passion. I'll throw this one to Suzanne first. For myself, as someone who's worked in nonprofit for quite a while, you know, it's not the industry that's known for the biggest salaries, right? So in what ways, you know, as people are thinking about making this shift, and whether it's moving into a role or an organization where their salary might be less, or taking on, you know, financial risk of venturing out on their own and starting their own business, you know, what advice do you have for people who are thinking about sort of assessing the financial implications of making a shift, especially if it isn't the situation where it's like, oh, my passion is also something that's going to make me a ton of money necessarily?
Gosh, I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, being the executive leader of an organization, I've really prided myself in working really hard to bring salaries up and pay. And actually, we're looking at, you know, our entry level being at a living wage in Massachusetts, which I think has just gone up recently again. So I think, you know, obviously we have to all make decisions in our lives about, you know, what our salary expectations and what kind of debt we're going to carry and just financial management in general. I happen to be so fortunate to come out of Western New England law school without any debt. You know, I got some great scholarship money. I was able to work full time while I went to school. So I was in a very unique position to be able to accept a salary that perhaps somebody coming out of college with a lot of debt wouldn't be able to accept. So, I mean, I think it's going to depend on every individual person's scenario. One of the things I did have was also a partner who was very supportive, while not financially, because he actually was the stay-at-home dad. I had that support for childcare and household stuff going on. So I think you really have to look at the whole picture of your life and what you want and what your goals are economically, and help you make those decisions. And there's a lot around, I know, Morgan, you're going to be the expert this, right, in pay equity and HR, looking at, you know, I think as leaders in an organization, whether any of you are going to be in that role, whether hiring, it's upon us to really make sure that there's equity in pay in our organizations and our companies. So if you're in an organization or you're looking at a job, I think there's a lot of information out there now about making sure you're asking for your worth, do the homework on those salaries that you should be getting and that you should be not afraid to ask. I see a number of women on here, and I think, you know, we tend to sort of sit back sometimes, right? We wait for them to tell us, you know, what they're going to pay us, and then we're like, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. We need to look at you know, what are white men in those same jobs getting paid, and we need to ask for that. We need to make sure that we know what our worth is, and don't be afraid to ask it. Because I think even in the nonprofit world, you know, my board of directors just went to bat for me and said, you know, if they had to replace Suzanne, they'd have to pay, you know, a certain wage. We need to be paying Suzanne that much. So I do think that's a big part of it, whether nonprofit or for-profit industry. Make sure you're getting paid what you are worth.
Excellent points. And you know, like the women's national soccer team, love the change that they've been able to make. And this is a hot topic. I've got 2 daughters, and we talk about this all the time because they're not of working age, but they will be, you know, after I blink another couple times. So very important, and I love that you brought that up. I do also think kind of along those lines of asking for what you're worth. I think the other piece of it too is do the work to make it known that you're worth that, right? And what I mean by that is what can you do outside of just work that increases your personal value, right? And examples of that would be really asking yourself, what books are you reading on a regular basis? What podcasts are you listening to? What classes or continuing ed or articles are you immersing yourself in? How are you networking with people? What extra skills can you build on top of that resume to say, yeah, I mean, not just the degree, or maybe if you happen to go for the MBA, that obviously is another notch, but what other soft skills can you hone in on that make you a cut above the rest, so that when you do go to ask or even demand for a certain number, it's got weight to it, right? It's not just, some sense of entitlement. It's like, hey, no, I'm out here, I'm honing my skills, and I bring all this stuff to the table. And I think that really especially I've been in the hiring realm for so long as well. And I look for those little things that people have gone out of their way to make sure that I understand that they're just a notch above the next candidate that on paper might look pretty much the same. Right. And again, it's the extra stuff that you can do, I think, that really makes a huge difference on the income scale.
When I was in the position to be hiring a lot of people, when someone came back and if they wanted more money, even if I didn't have the ability, even maybe I was at the peak of what I could offer, the way you do it makes a lot of difference, and it speaks a lot about you, right? So if you just come back and be like, I just want to negotiate, if you don't make the case for why you think that you should get more, it's really easy to turn that down, right? But if you make the case when you build it, because it also says a lot about what it's going to prove if you build a well-reasoned argument, is actually going to make me want to hire you more, because you took the time to build the argument in a respectful way. So I think there's actually no downside if you feel like you're not getting what you're worth to actually negotiating, as long as you do it in the right way.
The only thing I would add is, one, know your worth, but definitely also know when to walk away. So sometimes there's no wiggle room in the budget, right? Or sometimes they're just not going to pay you more. And so you may be the finalist, this may be your dream job, but if that number doesn't meet what you need, then there's another one out there, and there's probably a better job out there for you. So as emotional as it is, I feel like a lot of folks get really emotionally attached in the job search. Know when to walk away.
Thank you. I wonder, John, you mentioned some of the steps that folks can take to learn more. I'm wondering, for each of our panelists, I guess if you could share, are there any specific resources that you would recommend, a favorite book that you tell everybody to read, a podcast that you live by, anything else that could be helpful for our alumni and folks who are kind of starting this process of, realigning their work?
And I will go one step a little more specific, maybe for Suzanne, because you had mentioned it, and Morgan, because it is more up your alley potentially. But you had talked about knowing your worth and utilizing resources to find out what you should be asking for, if you have any specific resources for individuals for that.
I'll throw something out there, just because it rocked my world lately, and I can't believe it took me 43 years to find this, but somebody handed me a book called The 4 Agreements. And I don't know if anybody's ever read that or heard of it or whatever. Really simple, kind of a fable life lesson kind of book. But somebody handed that to me about 6 months ago and said, just give this a read. I know you read a lot. I'm like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And I've read it twice, and there's basically, I won't give you the cliff notes of it, but it's really good stuff. And it's come up in so many conversations from random people that, it's kind of the law of attraction. Once you learn about something, you start seeing it everywhere. But I would highly recommend The 4 Agreements as a pretty good guidebook for life, in terms of just being true to yourself. And I think a lot of it starts there, when you start going out to self-discover and also see what's out in the marketplace and try to find a good fit. I think a lot of it is we have to make sure that we have our own head on straight first, before we go out and just say, all right, I gotta look for the next shiny new object because I think I'm ready for some change. Well, I gotta make sure I'm good first. So I'm just gonna put that out there as highly recommended.
So
Oh,
go ahead.
go
Oh, go ahead,
ahead.
Suzanne, please. Go ahead.
So one of our board members here, she's in the Brooklyn area, but she started a company, We Wager. Her name is Cynthia Medina Carson. And it's all around salary transparency, particularly women of color and women of color in STEM. And she has a great blog. It's conversations where, again, she really encourages actually women to talk to each other about their salary and their salary expectations. But that's a great resource, wewager.com. And it's Cynthia Medina Carson.
I was just going to add two things about, first of all, using LinkedIn as a tool. I think it's an underutilized tool by a lot of, especially people maybe they're earlier in their career that think that they don't have as much to offer. I think you always can offer a perspective, and someone's going to Google you. And if you have some time, maybe you share stuff and you offer a perspective, that's really valuable content that I'm going to learn a lot about you from just even those little snippets. And as far as a book that just changed my life and changed my career, and unfortunately it's getting more and more dated, but it's called Good to Great by Jim Collins, and just absolutely fantastic book. It's honestly, I reference it probably once a week in terms of how I look at organizational structure, what I'm going after in terms of like things like hedgehog concept, which is a concept in there, and then leadership in terms of being like a level 5 leader versus a level 4 leader. And the book talks about that, and just it's a really important book to me, so I'd recommend it.
Christina, I think put it in the chat, but I suggested levels.fyi for tech salary comparison. We Wager is amazing. I just looked it up, so thank you for sharing that, Suzanne. I think for me, my learning, well, I'm obsessed. I'm a nerd, so I love to learn as much as I can. I'm a sponge. But for me, once I decided on recruiting, I really sought out recruiting resources. So at the beginning of this year, I took a tech recruiting course that was paid for by my job. So finding other opportunities if there is a cost associated to kind of fund that. I also actually have recently taken up interest in project management. So I'm doing a free course through Coursera, but there's a ton of free content out there. Coursera, Udemy, Udemy, and platforms of the like. And so I would encourage you to do your own research about what you're interested in and what excites you, and try it out. I thought I was interested in project management. We'll see how I feel about it in a couple of weeks, but just starting the course as well. So find what you like and explore it. And if you don't like it, you don't have to do it. Move on to the next thing. So.
Great, thank you. So it's a little bit of a step in a different direction with our discussion, but a lot of people I hear from, and I think potentially some of the folks who've joined us today, are feeling stuck and unsatisfied, but don't necessarily have the direction of what is the next thing, what is that passion point that can actually become something that creates a fulfilling career. So for those folks who are maybe in that stage of the process of, recognizing that what they have now is not what they want, but not sure where they want to go, are there any specific suggestions you have for sort of how to undertake that? I mean, obviously it's a bit like introspective, but like, how do they undertake that assessment of themselves and where they should be, looking for their next step?
I guess I was facing one of those decisions, again, years back when I even just decided to go to law school. I mean, I had a pretty decent job with a different nonprofit in the organization, but I didn't have really the educational background to make a lateral move to another organization. And I knew that was happening, but I was really I was kind of dissatisfied where I was. I knew I needed to make a change, but again, a little bit fearful around the educational background. So I had to make a decision about, going back to school. Landed at, law school, which is, was a phenomenal decision to make. But, I remember one of my family members saying, it was going to be 4 years for me to do it, working full time and doing part time. And it was like, well, 4 years is going to pass no matter what. And where you find yourself at the end of it is up to you. And so I think, those decisions about making a change, if it's maybe, again, like, I love that, Morgan, there's a lot of free coursework out there right now, whether it's taking a class, even if it takes 6 months or a year, a certification program, or going back to school, or even just saying, I'm going to try this other job for a year. the time is going to pass one way or another. And you're either going to be a year down the road saying, I'm still stuck, or you're going to be a year down the road saying, I took a risk, maybe it didn't work out. Obviously, if there's some financial challenges around that, we have to be careful around that, not to put ourselves in a position. But I mean, the time is going to pass one way or another, right? And so where you find yourself at the end of that is really up to you and making those changes.
You know, I like the idea of visualization. Oh, sorry, John.
No, you go ahead.
I like the idea of visualization about where you are currently and where you want to be, and considering how that's going to be, because at the end of the day, it's about how you feel, right? Money's going to make you feel a certain way. Your job role is going to make you feel a certain way. And you have to decide whether, because sometimes taking a pivot in your career may mean less money in the short term for more money later on. And sometimes the emotional baggage of, like, say you have some savings. Like for me, I'll talk about it from a personal perspective. I went from a salary to zero for several months, and that caused me letting go of the emotional baggage I put around my savings, right? And I was fortunate to have some savings that I could expend, right? Once I let go of that as a nest egg and I looked at it more as a resource, that it was a tool to get me where I wanted to go, that changed things fundamentally for me. So I didn't mind making the withdrawals out of that account to fund my family while I was making little money, you know, before I, been able to grow it, right? So I think sometimes you have to just consider, and the way I got there was I visualized am I going to feel if I am, in my case, my own boss, making my own rules about how I'm going to interact with clients and how I'm going to price things and how am I going to feel, right? And what am I going to be able to let go of? Is that going to be worth more to me than having this asset in my, in the savings account, right? And I guess that's how I just visualize it's about utility, right? How are you going to feel at the end of the day? To me, that can make some decisions around if you have to make a left or right turn in your career.
Great perspective. I'm big on putting pen to paper, and I think getting back to the original question about somebody who kind of feels stuck and how do they process where to go when they don't know what that next step is, or even how to make it materialize. And I think that, classic pros and cons list, right? Or even just a data dump, right? All the things that are running through my brain of things that I may want to do with my life, even if they're completely out of the realm, even if it's just never going to work, write it down anyway, right? And start to hash that out. I think a lot of times we have so many thoughts running through our brain that we never take the time to spit it out, right? And it remains a thought because we hang out in that comfortable space. It's uncomfortable to take a mental inventory and actually write out all the things that I really want to do with my life. And I think once you start that process and then start making it a little bit more specific, I'm a huge fan of Traction. That's another book or resource and complete online academy that if people haven't checked it out, please do so. It's especially for entrepreneurs. But they have a great format for goal setting, right? They have a great format for what is your 20-year vision, right? What's your 10-year plan? What's your 3 to 5 year goal? What's your 1 year, short-term goal? And then boiling it down to 3 months at a time, even down to daily behaviors, right? So you can look at the macro idea, but you can also boil it down to how am I going to make this change on a daily basis that's at least getting me towards something that I want. And again, most people are scared, to Suzanne's point, I think the fear sets in, and making career change is absolutely an act of bravery, right? It is. Some of it is, and Morgan, you said you got lucky. Well, I think talented people get lucky more often than non-talented. But at some point, and Rob, too, right? At some point, you gotta basically plug your nose, close your eyes, and jump in the icy pool, right? You've planned enough, and then there's still some of that unknown, and you gotta just go for it. But I think if you can strategically process all the thoughts in your head and try to whittle it down to things that you're passionate about, that's where you start, because then it at least tells you what those viable options are for career choices. And again, it's got to make economic sense. It's got to give you work-life balance, but most importantly, it's got to be something that you want to do. And until you start putting pen to paper, they're all just dreams that are floating around in your head.
And Morgan, I know you shared a bit about your own experience in the intro at the front end, but having recently made the transition for yourself, do you feel like that aligns with what your process was?
Yeah, 100%. So I knew I wanted to leave higher ed probably after my first 3 or 4 years. And I stayed another 4 years. So, so loosely was searching for that whole time. Really started to dedicate myself to my job search in 2 years. It took me about 2 years to really kind of like stop playing around with myself. I also was so like burnt out. I would just look at jobs and save them to my LinkedIn and then never go back to them because I would be so overwhelmed. Like, how do I even transition? And so I think my advice is start slow. Give yourself space to like, especially if you're burnt out or you're just in a place where you're like treading water in your current role, like give yourself space to kind of process that. And then I really like John's advice to like put pen to paper. And even if it's like, I definitely do not want this in my next job, which is kind of where I started. These are all the things I'm fed up about, or I don't ever want to see again, or these are the things I can tolerate, or these are the things I like at the top of my list. I absolutely need to have. I need to have growth. I need to have autonomy. I need to have flexibility, all of those things. And let that again fuel your search. My last piece too is look at your network. I know it's really scary to like reach out to somebody and be like, hey, can we have coffee or tea, even if it's via Zoom? I'm always happy to give 15, 20, 30 minutes of my time. And if you want to do it again next week, I'm down to do that too, because it breaks up my day and it is exciting for me. So don't be afraid to leverage your network.
Yeah, and to that point, I love that, Morgan. And to that point too, kind of an interesting thing has happened to me in the past few years is I was always the mentee, right? I was always the one asking people for time. And then at some point, people start asking you for time. And I think it just means I'm getting old. But, it's kind of an interesting dynamic where it's like, to your point, Morgan, I would love to spend time with someone who's asking good questions. Because again, it gives me fulfillment, right? And it also breaks up my week and it gives me something a little different. And I got to tell you, if anybody on this call has ever been a mentor of any sort, it is the most rewarding thing you can do is meet with a like-minded person who really wants to know what's going on in your mind. So, to your point, ask, right? Ask, even though it's a little scary. The worst they can do is say no.
Thank you.
Can I jump in with a quick question? You mentioned Traction, I believe, earlier. Is that a book or a website or a program? Can you elaborate on that a little bit? We had a question about it.
Yeah, so the architect of it, I call him an architect because it's more of a plan versus a book, is Gino Wickman. And Gino Wickman and his team have created something called EOS, which is the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And the book is called Traction, and it highlights this EOS platform. There's a ton of resources on their website, and there's all kinds of continuing ed. There's classes. I actually got certified as a Traction facilitator, which was quite the process. And it's not just for small business. I actually use a lot of those tools when working with students that are looking to just build a life plan. But especially if anyone's considering going into small business of any sort, it's an invaluable tool because it basically creates systems around running a smooth operation and all of the moving parts of running a small business, which, Rob, it's madness, right? It's crazy. Some days you're running all the positions all at once, right? So, but yeah, it changed the way I look at even just the simple act of mapping out my goals in my life and where I want to go short-term and long-term. And most of the resources on there are free.
Awesome. We do need to get to our Q&A, but I have one more question before we switch over to that. I think a big thread through our conversation today has been around the emotions that are attached to work, whether it's the fear of making a transition, whether it's the emotions tied to like how you assess, what sort of compensation you need. Certainly in the space of work-life balance, I think that's like a whole other collection of people that I hear from who enjoy what they're doing. They just don't want to do it so much. They don't want it to consume their whole life. They want more time for their family. Suzanne, I know you mentioned about, having a partner at home who is helping to take care of the kids. I think that piece is sort of another tension point for folks who want to reach this level of satisfaction. And maybe they are already in the right field or doing the right kind of work, but they are at that point of burnout. And so I'm curious what suggestions the panel has for folks who might be in that state to try to reclaim, some other portions of life so that the work isn't all consuming. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, find a good therapist. and I'm being serious. And I think, we could have a whole nother panel on mental health in America, mental health in the workplace. But I do think from, family dynamics, marriage dynamics, parenting, career change, all of these realities of life that, quite honestly, when I was a student, I just never considered, because it was a lot easier to just, go to class and sleep in the mornings, but it quickly becomes a reality. And I think that, at least for me, finding really good advisors and therapists that can help to create boundaries, help to give you some guardrails and give you structure to manage all of these things. And, I've even incorporated some of this with my younger kids to say, hey guys, my girls are tweens, right? I got a 12-year-old and an 11-year-old, and it's like the hormones and all that, it's out of control, but it's like they need help and guidance to be able to channel this stuff. And I think that there is a ton of validity and there's a ton of resource with people who are trained in this stuff versus, me, I'm just a struggling dad that's trying to figure out how to talk to my 12-year-old daughter, right? So, I say it kind of tongue in cheek, but I'm being serious. I think, find the right people that can help you to have those boundaries and guardrails, because it's just going to make your life easier.
Maybe this is easier to say than it actually is in practice, but I feel that if you're with an organization that isn't respecting your time or giving you the resources to have a balance, then you're with the wrong organization, frankly. And I mean, the short term, don't start your own business if you want more time, at least not in the short term. Maybe long term, you can worry about that. But, going back to like the corporate side of it, right? Like there's organizations that are willing to support you and help you. There's enough of that, especially in the market where I think that talent is harder to find, where as opposed to other points in our, economic history. I think that you find something else. If you are passionate about what you're doing, but you are, not having any balance, find something else, because life is too valuable for you to feel that way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say it's about boundaries. I mean, as the executive of an organization that, I'm responsible, I have to be that role model. So if I'm sending emails at midnight or I just don't do it. I don't work on the evenings and the weekends. I mean, I have to set that boundary for myself. Again, I'm also have a supportive family, but I guess we all need to learn how to say no as well. But I agree 100%, Rob, what you're saying around, if you're working for a company that you've spoken up and you've said, I need some boundary, I need some life here, and you got a boss that is continuing 24/7. I see them. I see the executive leaders, and even in the network, and I'm like, oh, that can't be good for your organization. Usually that person's gone within 2 or 3 years because they burnt themselves out and they burnt everybody else around them. So if you're that person that feels that you constantly have to be working and your work is a part of a team, you're probably actually not only affecting your own health, but you're affecting your team's health. So I would say, find those boundaries. And yes, John, good mental health, a therapist along the way is really important. But what are you saying yes to that you should be saying no to? I think start there, advocate for yourself with your employer, your boss, your team, whatever. And then, and then seek a good therapist. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with John. Although I do recognize for some folks, therapy is not easily accessible financially. And so I would suggest just in place of that, finding either a mentor, a cheerleader, a good friend outside of the organization, outside of the industry, even if you can, just to kind of bounce ideas off, role play, like how am I going to set this boundary with this supervisor, with this coworker? I know for me, at the start of my job search, I started therapy. I was the sole DEI practitioner in the middle of summer 2020, and it was messy. So especially as a Black woman in a predominantly white institution. So I had a lot to sort out there before I could really even buckle down and like do the things I needed to do for myself to get myself out of that situation. And then the other thing is set small goals. So if it's, I'm going to apply to one job a week, or if this week I'm going to revamp this one section of my resume, do that and meet your goal and spend 30 minutes, no more, and keep it moving. Set another goal for next week. So.
Great, thank you. And I apologize for my poor time management. I've monopolized most of our conversation. I do want to switch over into our Q&A portion for any of our folks who are on the line live with us who have any questions. Christina, have we gotten any questions through the chat box yet? I guess as a reminder, we're a small enough group. You can probably just unmute yourself. You don't need to raise your hand to be called on, or drop a question in the chat if you prefer not to ask your question out loud.
Just
Or
an
I'll just
appreciative
keep
note
going.
for everyone's time and insights.
Anyone?
Okay, well, I will chime in. We've talked a lot about finding your passion and your joy through work. And for some people, they can ultimately get to that point. And for others, you know, right now it's about making ends meet. How do you suggest finding the balance and filling your cup outside of work?
Suzanne's going to love my answer for this one. Donate your time, right? Like get involved, find something that feeds that personal passion. And I mean, everybody always thinks of charity as being, you know, cutting the check. And I can tell you, having worked with so many organizations through the years, that they really need your time more than, well, I shouldn't say more than they need your money. They need both, but they really, really need your time too. And there's so many things to do that can fill that cup, right? And can give you that fulfillment on a personal level. It doesn't always have to be through the channel of work. And sometimes those things are related. I mean, I've had so many great networking opportunities as a business owner to also volunteer and give time, right? So I think that there's some corporate responsibility out there as well. You know, you're running an organization or you're running a team, you're part of a community, you should be giving back, right? So I think you can really find a happy medium of all those things. And there is no shortage of need out there. You know, right here in Pioneer Valley, right? I mean, right in our backyard, there's so much to be done. So I think that's my easy answer. And it feels good.
And beyond that, I would say, you know, I love that, you know, do better for others and you'll feel better about yourself, I think, you know, but at the same time too, sometimes the worst feeling is that you're stuck in a situation and you're doing nothing about it and nothing's moving forward for you. So picking up the side, like I love, like Morgan, how you felt like, you know, you wanted to explore project management. Maybe that's relevant to the career, but doing something different, giving yourself an additional skill set feels like you're moving yourself forward. You know, it gets you to focus on that rather than the misery maybe you're feeling in your everyday, because that's the hard part, right? When you're just miserable. And yeah, it's easy for us to say, like, I before I said just move on. Well, that's easy for me to say, right? You still have to pay your bills next week, right? And if you can't just, sometimes you can't just quit, right? So do what you can to take control of your situation. And sometimes that's personal betterment also, you know, blogs, podcasts, you know, taking a course, whatever it is.
Well, and the one thing that I've learned, and it's come up so many times in my life, is that courage is not the opposite of fear. It's not being afraid. It's being afraid, but moving ahead anyway. Right. And that's always been so powerful to me, because it's like, I think sometimes we only want to move forward if we're not scared. And that just is not reality anymore. And I don't think it's ever been, if you've ever been through a career change, because it's the fear of the unknown, right? But I think summoning up that courage, and again, putting pen to paper, processing whatever you're afraid of, but understanding that that's not going to go away And I love Suzanne. The biggest takeaway today for me is time's going to pass anyway. What the hell are you going to do about it? Right? Like that rocked my world today. So thank you. But I'm stealing that. I'm going to use it forever. But I love that. Like, hey, this fear is not going to go away. A year from now, what are you going to be thinking about? What actions you've done? So I think the courage and the bravery comes out of moving ahead, knowing that that time will pass and that I'm actually taking control of my destiny. And also knowing sometimes it's not going to work out. I've had so many failures, crash and burn, but I generally learned way more from those than I did the easy successes.
Thank you. I'll have maybe a last call for any questions from our participants. If you do have any, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can grab answers for you and include it in the follow-up. I just want to take a minute to thank each of our panelists today. I mean, I certainly got a lot of valuable takeaways. I can only imagine how much smoother the earlier part of my career might have been had I heard some of this advice, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But thank you for this discussion. I think it was really helpful, and hopefully everyone who's joined us today and who views this on the recording after really does take some actionable steps that they can take to connect their passions with their own career. I also do want to just do a shout out to the Western New England Alumni Association, which hosted this program. Two members of our alumni board, Rob and John, are actually on the call as panelists today, but this is part of what we do in the Alumni Association, is bringing valuable programs to help enhance your life and keep you connected to the university. The recording of this program will be available on our YouTube channel, and please do keep an eye on your email. I'll send a follow-up with a request for some feedback, also a link to the recording and contact information for all of our panelists who graciously agreed to share that with our participants for today. So thank you again. We'll do a little round of applause for our panel. This was a great discussion. I really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.